Hi everyone, I'm Josh. Welcome today to my wrap up for fall and winter of 2024. It's my first wrap up of the year, my first time doing a quarterly wrap up. I'm excited to talk about the books that I've been reading. I had some good ones. I don't think as many that I loved as much as I would have liked, but still some decent reads. This new spring quarter is a transition for me in some personal ways that will likely mean that I end up reading more, which is, I guess, some positive. Hopefully I'll find some more favorites next month. But for now, let's talk about the books that I read. Let's start with just some general stats for the quarter. I read 30 books in total. There's like an exponentially decreasing amount of books I read per month. I guess we'll jump straight into that. You can see total number of books that I read were a lot higher in January than February than March. Part of that is just, life picking up after vacation. But also I was traveling a lot for work and for personal reasons in March, which meant that I didn't get to read as much. I need that pattern. But also, when I'm traveling, I'm spending time with loved ones. So naturally, I just don't have as much time to myself to sit down and enjoy a book, especially an audiobook, which is my primary mode of reading. Total number of pages from about 4,000 to 3,000 to just over 1,000. I still have expectations and hopes to do better this next quarter, which, like I said, I feel like to be reading more, hopefully. The average pages per book that I've read each month was increasing. Part of that's I did a lot of the books that I read in January there was a lot of novellas or rereads of the Wayward children's series. Still between 250 and like 350 pages, not even that. That's on average, I should say. Talking more specifically about pages, average page number was 295. The median page was 274. The standard deviation was 134. My minimum was 144. My maximum 658. A total of 8,853 pages. As far as genre, it's pretty standard, mostly speculative, horror, sci-fi, and fantasy being the largest one. Some nonfiction, some what I consider just general fiction from historical classics and contemporary. Of course, there's some naturally a lot of blending between that. Actually, I just realized I read 28 books, not 30. I miscounted for some reason. I think I was counting 2 that I've already read this month in April. My average book rating for the quarter was 3.96, but a lot of those were rereads. The average of just my new reads was 3.64, and the average of my rereads was 4.61. The lows and highs there were 2 stars for my new reads, and the low for my rereads was a 4. Tells you my rereads definitely bias my average. Intersectionally speaking, half of what I read was from an intersectional experience or perspective rather. Among those, about 30% were BIPOC individuals. 57%, nearly 2/3 of what I read was queer, which I'm definitely happy about. Bring on the queerness. And then gender-wise, 57% were cis female, and only 4% were by trans authors, non-binary otherwise. And that's definitely something I want to improve on. Then just commenting on a couple things. My average audiobook rating, a new value that I'm deciding to keep track of. Shout out to my co-worker and friend Rita for suggesting I do this. Basically just have a ranking of good, bad, and exceptional. I rarely find an audiobook to be bad or exceptional. Usually it's just fine. About a quarter were exceptional, which I guess is really good, but a lot of those were from rereads I just naturally already loved. And then finally, talking about publication years and one of the major goals I have for myself this year. I'm not necessarily on track. What you see is the publication years brackets. In parentheses, you see my goal versus below it what I actually read. A bit more 2020s than what I was aiming for, at least for the year, so I'm still working on fixing that. Same with 2010s, but when it comes to 2000s, I'm nowhere near close enough. I'm only halfway there, which I have a lot of books planned I think will get me closer to that goal for the year. And then when it comes to before 1950, I'm just now realizing that there are no 1980s and 90s here, which means I'm definitely not targeting that properly. That should be 10% of my reads, so it's 10% less than it should be. On the bright side, less, but like before the 1980s, I'm above average, which doesn't mean much because my goal there is fairly low for the year. So this is something I'm thinking about. It's improved from last year, I think that's for sure, but can still do better. I want to do more backlists. If you haven't seen those videos, I'll show you link below. Backlist books that I'm going to prioritize this year. Now let's talk about the books that I read. Because this is a new approach of doing wrap-ups for me, I don't want to just talk about every book equally. I want to make sure I focus on the ones that I found most thought-provoking, whether that be in a negative way or a positive one. I will only discuss the best and worst of the quarter. I will, again, mention every book that I've read, and I will make sure I reference where you can find specific reviews if I have them. Some of them are shorts, some of them are in vlogs, some of them are just on Goodreads. But I don't want to spend too much time fixating on books that are just okay. There's going to be probably between 3 and 4 stars, and no, maybe 3.5 and 4 stars. I was going to do anything less than 3 stars was just the worst. But then I realized I only have a couple 3 stars. I would make the worst be anything 3 stars and below. The best is going to be 4.5 and above. So let's start with the worst, working our way up. The Ecstatic by Victor Laval. I talk about this in my February Blackathon reading vlog, so check it out there. I'll just say here, this book felt experimental by Laval. It was not nearly as accessible as a lot of his works. So this is his first novel ever published. It's the first one I've not loved enthusiastically. Part of it is because it's not an audio, so it made it less accessible to me. I listen to text-to-speech. But also, it's the type of story we're looking at. This is a story of a young man who suffers with schizophrenia. He is going to college, or he was. Now he's living with his family, and there's some conflict going on there just for regular personal reasons, but also the added conflict of his schizophrenia. And it's the schizophrenia that makes this book experimental, because the entire novel is through his perspective. And that schizophrenia introduces a level of absurdism and just utter confusion throughout the novel in a way that is intriguing. But for me, I really wasn't in the headspace for it. I did not have the attention span to invest in that type of narrative, and ultimately it just didn't work for me. I'm saying that now because I don't think it's a bad novel that isn't worth reading. It didn't work for me probably because I just wasn't in the headspace. If it sounds like an intriguing premise, and it sounds like something you think you might enjoy, sort of the effort it goes into trying to understand a situation, what's real, what's not, and what's just completely in his head, this might be worth checking out. But for me, I gave it 2 stars because just for me, it wasn't a good experience. My next 2-star is Miss Kennedy by Barbara Leaming. I have a whole review dedicated to this. I will just say this. One, of course, check out that review, but Barbara Leaming wrote an extremely compelling biography here. The problem I have is that it felt more demeaning than anything to Miss Kennedy, and it also felt like it was really more interested in gossip than it was in actual fact. And the level of insight we got, while intriguing, felt almost omniscient in nature, in a way that just did not feel possible. And because of that, it made me question everything when there were the insertion of just what seems like probably pure speculation interlaced between facts. Facts that feel like secondary to the actual conflict of basically JFK's constant cheating and the emotional turmoil that Miss Kennedy goes through. And basically her biggest strengths in the eyes of Barbara Leaming is just her ability to maintain composure in moments of stress. And it's just really demeaning. Check out that video review if you want my full thoughts there. I actually have a lot to say. I think there's a lot to be said about the role of the biographer and the line between speculation, gossip, and real journalism. Clearly, I had a lot to say about it, and I still feel really enthusiastic about my thoughts on the book. So kudos to Leaming for that. But yeah, another 2-star. Probably I should have started with this because I think it arguably is worse than The Ecstatic. Now up to 3 stars. I have 2. Let's start with Dune. Dune is part of the reasons why I wanted to include 3 stars here, because I feel bad. Not just feel bad, I just felt mixed about this book. It was fine. I just found myself not caring enough. It felt really slow, and also the pacing was off. Like you'd have moments of just dullness, and then something intense would happen. It's like, oh, finally I'm invested, and then no, it's back down. It's not that I need fast pace. It was just that I wasn't very interested in the world. What I will say is the writing is remarkably accessible, considering it was written 65 years ago. I think part of the problem I had was just a lack of clarity in the storytelling. I think it was a lot of time jumps, which weren't clear to me. It wasn't clear what was happening between moments or when we were transitioning, where we were transitioning to. I found the movie to be much more effective in that, partly because I know I didn't have any time jumps. I did love the movie, and it makes me really want to consider the second book, but I think the movie did it better. It did a better job not only in telling the story in an effective way, but in communicating the fundamental premise or sort of idea behind this book, that Paul is not a hero, he is the villain. There's a criticism here that is much more deliberate in the film than it is here, and I just like the movie more. But ultimately, the book just felt not that compelling. Next up is Orlando by Virginia Woolf, and this is for the same project that I've alluded to in my other videos. This book is a pseudo-biography, or written in the style of a biography, of a man named Orlando who lived in the 16th century and somehow got the ability to live forever. And sometime in his early 30s, he transforms into a woman. And what drew me to this book was it's a conversation on gender and potentially sexuality. And ultimately, what I was disappointed by here was that I felt like the book kind of went over my head. It wasn't as direct a conversation as I would have liked. It was all kind of subtle. A lot of it was subtextual. And part of that is like my own lack of desire to try and parse through this old type of writing style, coupled with, just the world being, just not the most compelling. There were parts of it that were really intriguing, that sort of had that more direct conversation around Orlando's sexuality and identity as they transition from a man to a woman, and that reflection there. Specifically, I think when it comes to what it means to be a woman and how Orlando's experience as a woman is so fundamentally different than when she was a man. Her reflecting on the privileges or the double standards for her, and like that at its core makes this book really intriguing, especially as something that was written in 1928. I just wish I found more from it. I wish I didn't have to read through so much that bored me to get to those little tiny specks of intriguing conversation, or almost before its time conversation. Now moving on to the books that were sort of meant to me, I'm going to mention basically them in clusters, the 3.5 stars and the 4 stars. Starting with 3.5 stars, and let it just be said that these are books that I enjoyed, but for whatever reason there were things about them that just left me feeling kind of mid. And whether or not it's 3.5 versus 4 stars, really just a matter of more redeeming qualities for the book. If so, it would get a 4 star. A book that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I think if you've heard some of my recent reviews, you'll know sort of get a feel for what I constitute sort of a book that's good, but not something that I felt enthusiastic love for. A lot of these I have reviews for. If I refer you to those reviews, I'll link to them below if you want to hear more thoughts. I'm going to list all of these on the screen at once, but the order is still from least to best. First up, Mayo Clinic on Healthy Aging by a series of scientists from the Mayo Clinic. You can find my short review of this on my page. They Were Here Before Us by Halfon. You can find my written review on Goodreads. Long Division by Leaming. I believe I have a Goodreads review of this and a full discussion of it in my February Blackathon reading vlog. Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian and McAllister. This I referred to my Goodreads review because I had a lot of thoughts about this despite it being kind of a mid book. The Other Valley by Scott Alexander Howard, another shorts review that I referred to there. So for all of these, I may have thoughts to say, but the ultimate conclusion is the same of it being sort of a mid book. There are obviously things that I could say, because I thought a lot about all of these books. But ultimately what I'll say is because they were mid, I just don't want to fixate too much on them. And if you're interested in more, make sure to give me the resources to hear my complete thoughts on all of them. Before we get to 4, I'll also say part of the reason I do shorts is because these are books that I want to talk about to some extent, and or there are books that I had hoped to do a full review for, and ultimately I realized because they're kind of mid, I have much less to say, and what I do have to say can usually be said fairly succinctly, hence the existence of these shorts reviews. Now up to our 4 star, again from least to most favorite, respectively. Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor. This is my Blackathon reading vlog. Womb City by Tlotlo and Tsamaase, also my Blackathon reading vlog, but there's a full review. I'll first see there, a lot of thoughts on that. Edge Dancer by Brandon Sanderson, not much to say on that really. Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle. This I have a Goodreads review for because I had high expectations for this and did not live up to it, at least not completely. Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Y. Davis. A lot of thoughts on this that I explored in my reading vlog, so I refer to you there for that discussion. I'm not going to rehash it here. The Trial by Frank Kafka. I don't have a review out for this, but I will be posting my thoughts on this in the coming months, probably. As we get these 4 stars, they are more thought-provoking than 3.5. And part of me wants to say, fuck it, just discuss them, but I really want to try this new pattern of, doing a bulk wrap-up and focusing on the ones that are most exciting. I have a lot of thoughts of why I feel like they don't quite live up to Be the Best of the Best, like I said, and I referred you to all of those for my full thoughts. Now on to the books that I do have more to say, or at least feel more exciting about, the one I really want to highlight here. First up is the Wayward Children series. Most of these were rereads. In fact, all of them were, even the newest book, because I got an arc for it last year. I did a full ranking video where I talk about my feelings about all these books. If you're interested in those, please check that out. It's a very thorough discussion of my thoughts on this series and why I love this brutal fantasy that Sean McGuire has created. So the next book is going to be A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I've heard great things about this, and I just want to say I absolutely adored it. This book I was really worried about because I'd heard mixed reviews, partly because I think there's not much of a plot. But for whatever reason, the lack of a plot did not bother me. I adored these characters. The depth to the characters and depth to the world, the breadth of the world, it felt so well realized. Coupled with just the really firm grounding in our characters, made this book such a phenomenal read. This and the ones I'll talk about are books that truly were great. And I'm just really glad I have at least some I can point to as things that I loved, even if they're only a small fraction of all the books I read this last quarter. I was really excited to learn Becky Chambers had another book in the series, a few more I think. And they were really disappointed when I found out that they're basically just in the same world, maybe with some tangential characters, but not really the same story. The story that we were in is ended, where it's really focused on the character growth of the characters in the story. You're introduced to them, they're introduced to each other in some ways, and they're growing and learning as people, well, as entities, because they're not all people. And I really loved that arc, all of them, and also just the overall design of this world. It was honestly exactly what I wanted from The Expanse. I wanted a world that felt as big as it was supposed to be, and this book gave me that. Then up next we have Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. 4.5 stars as well. This one I talk about in my February reading vlog. This book is such a great example of how to write a compelling dystopia sci-fi book that really reflects on what a future might look like if we don't address the capitalist and oppressive systems that we have set up. And this book, I think, mirrors really well Room City, which, again, hear that review. But Room City, the fundamental flaw there is just its really heavy-handed nature of addressing themes, while this one was woven in a way that was not subtle, but was also really effective. And what it really does is just show this sort of more extreme nature of our world. But it's not fundamentally different. It's so believable because it's simply an extrapolation of what already exists, where prisoners are dehumanized, over-policing leads to a particular type of people getting arrested. It just perpetuates existing systems of oppression. And this book handled it so well and managed to tell a really compelling story in the process. And then another reread for the quarter was The Good House of Tanner Do. It's been about 4, maybe 5 years since I read this for the first time. And I had a lot of thoughts on this, so I'll refer you to that vlog. I'll just say that I loved it even more than the first time. I think it had a more impactful ending than I initially thought. Part of that, I think, is just my own personal desires in horror and growing and changing from what it was back then, which was largely just set by my expectations around Stephen King. And also just a better appreciation, I think, for what the ending meant for our main character, the complex reality around how the ending was handled, which initially I didn't like the ending. I felt like it was too safe. And upon reread and hearing other people talk about it, I just had very different feelings. For my full conversation, again, check out that vlog. Then finally, another book that I read in that vlog was The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. This book could easily be a favorite of the year. It is 5 stars. I absolutely adored this book. It is not biography or memoir in the strictest sense. I think there is some inspiration by Dean Atta's own personal experience. It's basically about a young queer black boy who ultimately comes to drag as a way of just embracing his own identity, of celebrating his queerness and his feminist. And I just resonated so strongly with this book, and I absolutely adored it. I read so many books in February and throughout this entire quarter that just focused so much on trauma. And this book was fundamentally a book about celebrating queerness and just his identity. And I just adored it for that reason. It made me want to cry on multiple occasions, and 100% recommend. It's like far and away my favorite book of this quarter. So that's my wrap up for the first quarter. Hopefully my next quarter is an improvement over this. I feel like I had a lot more favorites last year. A lot of my favorites until the end of the year were from the first quarter. And I do not think that will be the case this year. Very few of them will be from the first quarter. Hopefully you enjoyed hearing me talk about the books that I'm reading. Let me know your thoughts on this sort of approach of, a quarterly wrap up, whether or not you appreciate the style I'm doing, whether it be just for the quarter or even just focusing on the best and worst books versus saying much less about the medium books. I'm interested in your feedback on whether or not that's an approach you appreciate versus, talking about every book and just doing it all that way. But either way, thanks for watching. If you made it to the end, I really appreciate you. Again, your support means a lot to me. Otherwise, hope you all have a great day and stay safe. And I'll see you next time.